Hello, class. Welcome back to our lecture. So we covered chapter 1. We're going to skip chapter 2 and 3. We'll be covering that later. But today we'll be doing chapter 4, giving your first speech. And we're going to be going over preparing your speech and delivering your speech. So in giving your first speech, the first step is going to be choosing a topic. That's usually the hardest step because you are trying to brainstorm and think, well, what really do I want to talk about? What topic am I interested in? And what topic do you feel that your audience will also be interested as well? So when you are picking your topic, you want to make sure also the level of your focus. You don't want it to cover too much or be a very broad topic because most times that you have to present something, you will have an allotted time and you don't want to run out of time. You also don't want to narrow it down so specifically that you don't use up all your time as well. So you don't want to finish your speech and still have lots of time left because it was just so narrow you couldn't find enough information over it. So you want to find that happy medium, something that's balanced right in the middle. So a good example would be if you're trying to decide on a topic and you're debating on dishes from all over the world, top dishes from Mexico, or enchiladas. The dishes from all over the world, that's just so broad that you might not have enough time to cover all of that. Enchiladas is so specific that you can cover it, but you might not have enough information to use up all your time. So a good happy medium would be top dishes from Mexico. It covers enough interesting information. It's not too much and not too little of information. So when you are choosing a topic, you also want to think about, what's going to be interesting. Something that's meaningful to you will most likely be meaningful to your audience. You're going to be thinking about how to structure your speech and how to make it either mysterious or suspenseful. That's something that will keep your audience hanging on to your every word, interested throughout your speech. Also, as far as topics, audiences like maybe different experiences that you've had. They like to hear about dangerous situations or adventure or drama. And you can also use colorful descriptive language to help keep it interesting throughout your speech. You can also use when appropriate, and if the setting's appropriate, if the audience is appropriate, and if the topic is appropriate, try to use witty remarks and jokes and funny situations as well. So when you're doing your speech, the actual preparing of your speech, it's important to know that there's three major parts of your speech. You have your introduction, you have your body, and then you have your conclusion. So the introduction is going to be the opening section of a speech, and that's where you're going to try to get the attention or hook your audience right away. The way you can do that is by either starting with a question, telling a story, making a startling statement, such as using statistics or figures, open with a quotation. And these, in the introduction, this is where you're giving your audience a clear sense of what your topic is about and what your purpose is with this speech, such as informing them or persuading them. So you want to use your introduction to make your audience want to hear more about what you have to say. Remember that you have 30 seconds to command your audience's attention. If you haven't hooked them within those 30 seconds, the possibility of maintaining their attention goes down. So here's some example of the ways that you can start your speech that we just covered. With posing a question, it's going to be a rhetorical question. So you're not really expecting a response from your audience, but it's more used so that they can stop and think about the question that you pose and actually process that. So here's an example of posing a rhetorical question. It comes from Obama's immigration address, and it states, "Are we a nation that tolerates the hypocrisy of a system where workers who pick our fruit and make our beds never have a chance to get right with the law? Are we a nation that accepts the cruelty of ripping children from their parents' arms? Or are we a nation that values families and works to keep them together? So you can see this is a rhetorical question to engage the audience. You want to allow a short pause. That way you allow the audience to actually think about the question and what their answer is to it. So this gets the audience to actively participate in your speech rather than just passively listening as they're creating a hypothesis or resolutions to that question. The other thing you want to do is you want to make your audience feel as though you are speaking to each of them individually. And a way to do that is when you're addressing the audience, you want to use words such as you and your, so it sounds like you're actually speaking to that person individually. The other example we discussed was telling a story. If you want to pause this so you can read this story could be an example of if you were doing a speech over a topic on, how we have our mindset and our idea set, but sometimes our reality and their reality might be different. But usually the story that you're going to start off with for a topic, obviously it has to somehow relate to your topic. It has to be used for the purpose of being making it more impactful. The story can be true. It can be fiction or nonfiction. It can be a story that's well known or a story that maybe is a personal story, but it has to relate to your speech. Then the other example is using a startling statement. So usually you want to use statistics or figures that are dramatic. Hearing that number really makes an impact in the beginning to catch the audience's attention. An example of this would be for my master thesis. I did it over veteran suicide and the family members who were left, the survivors, to mourn them. So I started off with the statistic about the 22 veterans a day who commit suicide. Now, according to research, 6 to 10 persons close to the victim remain to cope with the loss. So that means that an estimated 132 to 220 family members are left behind every day due to veteran suicide. So once again, you want it to use a statistic that is dramatic, that really will hook the audience and get their interest. Then when you open a speech with a quotation, it is one of the most powerful ways to begin a presentation. And you want to use a quotation that's memorable and that it relates to that message of what your topic is. Here's a really good quote. It comes from Gordon Moore, an engineer and co-founder of Intel Corporation. So you could use this quote, let's say if you were doing maybe like a motivational speech about overcoming obstacles, about not letting failure impede with moving forward and succeeding in life. So here's the quotation. I view this year's failure as next year's opportunity to try it again. Failures are not something to be avoided. You want to have them happen as quickly as you can so you can make progress rapidly. So that was the introduction. Now let's talk about the second part of your speech, and that's the body. That's going to be like the meat of your speech. It's the main section. It's going to take up most of your time. And there's two common ways of organizing your speech. You're going to have chronological order. So that's a method of speech which you're organizing by like a time pattern. So for example, if you are doing a speech about maybe your life, or you're doing a speech over somebody's life, a biography of somebody, you would use chronological order because you would start with their birth, a dateline of their most important achievements, and then their death. So that would be chronological. Then you have topical order. This is the organization method in which you divide your points into logical and consistent subtopics. So an example of this would be, let's say you're doing a speech about your life goals. So there's really no wrong way, but you're going to use the logical method. Maybe you're going to start with short-term goals and then move on to long-term goals, or you're going to do organization by your most important goals and then to the least important. So once again, there's really no wrong way when using the topical order. It's just something that makes sense, that's logical, and that it is easier for your audience as you're speaking to follow that flow. There are a lot more methods of organization, and we'll be covering those more in detail as we move along, but these are the most common methods. So when you come up with a topic, you're going to be dividing it into your main points. You want to limit the number of main points in your speech just because you are going to have specific time allotted depending on where you do your speech or why. But you don't want to do too many points that you don't have enough time to cover each. You want to try to make each main point stand out by introducing them with a transition statement. So the common amount of points you would want is 1 to 2. Now those are your main points. You might then break those down into sub-points. But when you are moving on from one point to another, you want to use transitional words or phrases. And an example of that would be you would start off with your main point, say, firstly, once you've covered that. And in addition, you cover that another point. And finally, so these are key words, transition words that your audience will be picking up on to know, okay, that was one point, they finished that, they're moving on to their next point. And then you have your conclusion. That's going to be the final section of the speech. This is going to allow the audience to know that you are about to finish and conclude your speech. In your conclusion, you are reinforcing your central idea, what you covered in your introduction. So I want you to think of the body of the speech as the actual movie. And you're going to use the introduction as a trailer or a preview. So you're going to give them a sneak peek of what's to come. What are those main things you're going to cover? And so your conclusion will help re-emphasize, reiterate what those points are, what your purpose is. That way you have them hooked in the beginning in your introduction. You have them hooked throughout your body of your speech. And in your conclusion, once again, you want to end with a dramatic, clever, or thought-provoking note or way. That way, once you finish your speech, they don't already move on and forget, that they're going to be processing and still thinking about what that topic was, what that concept or those ideas were. When you are delivering your speech, there's different ways of delivery. It's either by memorization or reading off of a script. There's also extemporaneously. The one that the greatest speakers use is extemporaneous delivery. And that is where you carefully prepare and rehearse a speech and you present or deliver it from just a very brief set of notes. This type of delivery requires you to know your content very, very well. So basically, you know the topic and the specifics of this topic by heart. The notes that you actually will use, normally you'll use a speaking outline, and that outline is just going to have keywords or phrases instead of sentences and paragraphs. And those keywords and phrases are just used in order to help you keep track of moving from one point to the next. But the good thing is this type of delivery, it allows you to use your own words. Since you're not memorizing and you're not reading off of a script, it comes off a lot more natural. And this also allows you to adjust your speech. Let's say you're speaking to one certain audience, and then the next audience might have maybe older people, younger people, some type of different demographic. Because it's not memorized, you can adjust the type of vocabulary that you use, or insert some other things that you might need to make it more impactful. With rehearsing your speech, it's very important that you concentrate on gaining control of your ideas rather than trying to learn the speech word for word. You want to rehearse your speech out loud. Sometimes when you type out your speech, you write it, it sounds really good in your head. But once you actually say it out loud, there might be a few things that you say, I don't know if that word really sounds best. Or, maybe I should rearrange the sentence. It kind of is clunky. So it allows for you to actually listen to the flow and the rhythm of your speech, something that you really can't tell when you're just reading it. You want to rehearse it in front of friends and family if possible and ask for their constructive feedback. They might be able to also pinpoint or note some things that would be more effective if you change them. And you also want to time your speech as you practice to make sure that you're not taking too much time over what would be allotted or that it's coming up too short. You also want to practice maybe the rate of your voice, kind of going back to some issues of nervousness. I had mentioned, I used to rush through my speeches. So what you can do with this is, if it's too short, stop and think, am I maybe talking too fast? Where really it's not too short. I'm just going through it really fast. So you want to time yourself and practice and see the rhythm. Try to use vocal variety. Try to practice that. Make sure that you're not very monotonous, but you're actually using that natural conversational speech the way it sounds when you're presenting. When it's actually your turn to present, you want to get up there, stand in a relaxed but upright posture. Just take a few seconds to gather your notes, gather your thoughts. You want to look over your audience, maybe smile, and that helps establish that rapport. And it'll actually help you to not just go up there and go straight into your speech without really taking that time to pause and prepare. So you actually won't be as nervous as well. The other thing you want to think about when you're doing your speeches are your gestures. You want to think about those motions of your hands and your arms or your feet. So once you've started speaking, feel free to use your hands to gesture, but you want to use natural movements. Something that I do is I practice my speech, but I'm also practicing my hand gestures. What are my hands doing? I try to line them up to match the transitions that I'm making, moving from one point to the next. So you want to make sure that your hand gestures, your nonverbal, is lining up with your verbal and what you're saying in your speech. Remember, you don't want your gestures or body movements to distract your listeners. If not, they'll be more focused on what your body's doing than what your actual message is. So when you're practicing, you want to try to see if anybody practicing in front of friends or family, see if maybe you're doing some type of nervous mannerisms, or maybe you are aware of what you do when you're nervous. And practicing will help you not do these so much, where it will be a habit, you're more aware of it when you're practicing and when you're actually presenting. So maybe you play with your hair, or you tend to shift your weight from one foot to another a lot, or rocking back and forth. One thing that I do is I tend to click the pen when I'm presenting. So when I do present, I make sure I don't have a pen available to avoid that. So just try to appear relaxed and calm, and make sure that your gestures and your body are making movements that are natural. You also want to make eye contact. When you're talking, look around, look at the audience that's around you as often as you can. It will be difficult when you first start because you're still trying to learn how to not depend so much on your notes or your outline. But as much as you can, look at your audience. Don't focus on just maybe one person or a few that you're more familiar with, but you want to acknowledge all of the audience. And that is a reason why it is important that you prepare, that you know your content by heart, that you don't have to depend so much on your outline. So it allows for more eye contact with your audience. And then going over your voice. Just mentioned this earlier, but you want your voice to be expressive as much as possible, just the way you would in a normal conversation. So even though you might have nerves, just take deep breaths and try to fight that temptation to just rush through your speech. You want to make an effort to speak up, maybe when you're nervous, or you just naturally have a very low voice where you sound like you're whispering. So just make an effort to speak up, slow down, project clearly, And basically that will keep you on track for speaking effectively. Now, if you look in your book on page 69 and 70, you'll see some examples of speeches with some very helpful commentary on the side. So there is a video on module 1 called The Power of Words. And I want you to look and watch at the video, pay close attention to the video, and stop and think about what the actual message is and why it's important to know the words and what we do with them. As speakers, we have ethic responsibility when we're speaking. It's important to know, are we using those words for good or for bad? Also, I want you to notice how the speaker starts the speech with a question, and the full use of his nonverbal, his gestures, supports the actual message of what he's saying. He's very good at holding or control of the stage. So he's, going back and forth on the stage. He's looking at the audience and addressing them. His body mannerisms do not distract from his message. And he hooks the audience from the intro, has great transitions that go through, and he ends with a good, strong ending. He has his audience in mind, so you'll notice he uses examples and stories that aren't so specific that you might not be able to relate to them, but they are not so specific, so it allows you to say, yeah, I could see that, or I can relate to that. Obviously, we can't discuss this in class, but we will be going over this with our actual discussions in Canvas.